Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a pretty heavy but absolutely crucial topic: how extreme socioeconomic deprivation and cultural norms drive some truly heartbreaking outcomes for India's most vulnerable communities. We're going to unpack the brutal economic calculations that families are forced to make simply to survive, and then trace the devastating ripple effects those decisions have across society. To really wrap our heads around this, let's start by grounding the data in a stark human reality. Recently, CCTV footage in Faridabad captured a 28-year-old woman named Neelam doing the absolute unthinkable, throwing her 18-month-old daughter into a drain. It's a chilling, completely devastating headline, right? But to truly understand a systemic issue like this, we have to look past our initial shock and examine the root causes that police investigators actually uncovered. This tragic event really pulls back the curtain on the brutal toll of severe poverty. Neelam was living in a slum with a disabled husband, and she simply couldn't sustain her family. The victim was the youngest of her 6 daughters. When questioned by the police, her primary motive was extreme financial hardship. It was the sheer, absolute inability to support another child that pushed this family over the edge into tragedy.
So you might be wondering, what's the broader systemic why behind such desperate acts? Well, academic research points us to the brutal economic calculations of son preference. In traditional patriarchal systems, sons are basically viewed as economic assets. They inherit property, they bring in dowries, and they act as an old-age pension for their parents. Daughters, on the other hand, are often viewed as profound financial liabilities. Because a daughter typically leaves her family when she marries, any investment in her upbringing is essentially seen as a loss. Plus, the looming threat of massive dowry expenses turns raising a female child into a literal financial crisis for families who are already living right on the brink. Now, this next detail is just chilling. There was an actual billboard message used by illegal medical clinics in India that read, "Invest 500 rupees now, save 50,000 later." It's a pure transactional commodification of female fiticide. It bypasses morality entirely and speaks directly to a poor family's absolute financial terror. For a family barely surviving, a future 50,000 rupee dowry isn't just an expense, it's total ruin. And this toxic environment has allowed illegal sex determination and abortion to become a highly transactional, everyday reality.
And of course, treating daughters as financial liabilities creates a disastrous ripple effect across the entire society. This elimination of female children caused the sex ratio to plummet to just 914 girls for every 1,000 boys back in 2011. But the tragedy doesn't stop at demographics. A scarcity of women directly fuels the illegal trafficking of young girls from neighboring regions. It spikes the rates of child marriage, and it creates a society with drastically heightened instances of violence and assault against the surviving female population. It's a vicious, vicious cycle.
All right, so shifting gears a bit, what actually happens to the youth who survive these deeply impoverished environments? Well, it turns out that the socioeconomic despair driving these gender-based tragedies is the exact same environment incubating juvenile delinquency. Data from a comprehensive study in Haryana paints a pretty stark picture of this intergenerational poverty. We're talking about a staggering 70% of juvenile offenders being completely illiterate or dropping out by just the 5th grade. And why did they leave school? Nearly 58% cited financial ruin. On top of that, over 61% belong to historically marginalized groups. When structural inequalities completely block young people from surviving or succeeding through normal, socially acceptable means, they often turn to deviant behavior, literally just to get by. But behind those statistics is a story of profound family disruption. Nearly half. Think about that. Almost 50% of the juvenile offenders in this study had lost their fathers before turning 18. This massive rate of early parental mortality leaves these kids to be raised by single mothers who are already battling the extreme financial and social marginalization we talked about earlier. That lack of supervision, combined with severe emotional neglect and intense economic strain, creates a highly vulnerable psychological state for these kids. When we break down the actual offenses, it's incredibly revealing. While basic financial survival drives theft to the #1 spot at about a quarter of all crimes, a shockingly high percentage of these marginalized youths are pushed into severe, violent acts. If you combine grievous hurt, murder, and culpable homicide, you're looking at a massive block of violent behavior. This tells us that juvenile delinquency in these regions isn't just petty survival crime. The structural breakdown of the family and community is breeding intense aggression and social deterioration.
So, what exactly pushes a youth from petty crime into serious violence? It's really a compounding effect. If a juvenile battles substance abuse, their odds of committing a violent crime skyrocket by over 3 times. If their family makes less than 10,000 rupees, the likelihood nearly triples. These kids aren't just facing low income, they're facing low income plus low education plus a disrupted family. It's a perfect storm of disadvantage that pushes them right over the edge.
Okay, so how do we actually break this cycle? Researchers are calling for a massive systemic shift from merely punishing offenders to proactively empowering vulnerable families. Punitive measures alone just do not work against structural poverty. Step 1 is education, preventing dropouts through non-formal and vocational training to essentially remove the financial burden of schooling. Step 2 requires targeted financial assistance to ease the extreme economic strain that leads to events like female feticide or youth theft. And Step 3 demands that our justice system focuses on counseling, psychological support, and reintegration skills, rather than just locking away the symptoms of society's failures. I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder regarding our collective responsibility. We've seen how a mother's devastating choice and a youth's violent path are both born from the exact same soil of severe socioeconomic deprivation and cultural marginalization. The data is super clear, and the human cost is immeasurable. The real question is, will we continue to merely react to these tragic symptoms, or will we finally commit to dismantling the systemic poverty that actually causes them? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this deep dive has given you a clearer understanding of the profound costs of survival.